In January 2019, temperatures in interior Alaska plunged to -66 degrees Fahrenheit. At that extreme, exposed skin freezes in minutes, and an unheated cabin becomes life-threatening within hours. For homesteaders living more than 30 miles from the nearest town, there is no repair crew to call and no grid to fall back on. They stay warm using only self-sufficient heating systems they can fuel, maintain, and fix themselves. But keeping a home habitable at 60 below demands far more than a reliable stove. It demands a complete architecture of survival, and it all starts with the cold itself. Interior Alaska is defined by a kind of cold that most Americans will never experience. In Fairbanks, the average January low hovers near -17 degrees Fahrenheit, but that's just the baseline. In outlying towns like Tok and Chicken, it is common for temperatures to drop below -30 degrees. During the record-setting cold snap of January 2019, thermometers in Fairbanks registered -66 degrees, the lowest daily low in more than 50 years. At these extremes, the difference between safety and danger is measured in minutes. Exposed skin can freeze in less than 10 minutes at -60 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside an unheated cabin, the temperature can fall below freezing in under an hour, and without a working heat source, core body temperature can slip below 90 degrees Fahrenheit, crossing into hypothermia territory. If it drops to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, survival becomes unlikely. For families living more than 30 miles from the nearest town, help is not on the way. There are no backup generators humming nearby, no road crews to dig out a buried propane tank, no utility workers to fix a snapped power line. The only barrier between a livable home and a life-threatening freezer is the heat they can make and keep themselves. In this environment, every decision about heating is a decision about survival. In the world of off-grid Alaskan homesteads, high-mass wood stoves are not a luxury. They are the backbone of survival. Among these, the Blaze King stands out for a reason. With a firebox volume of 2.3 cubic feet, it can hold enough seasoned birch or spruce to burn steadily for 30 to 40 hours on a single load. EPA testing lists its low burn output at 10,641 BTU per hour, a figure that matches the heat demands of cabins between 400 and 800 square feet during the coldest stretches. This kind of endurance is not theoretical. It is measured in the daily routines of families who rely on their stove to keep the interior above freezing when outside temperatures drop to -40 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. The catalytic combustor inside the Blaze King reduces wood consumption by about 30% compared to non-catalytic models, stretching each cord further through the winter. Real-world efficiency hovers around 81%, translating to less labor, less fuel, and more stable warmth. The upfront cost, between $5,300 and $6,800, is steep, but for homesteaders, it is an investment in safety. When a single load can hold the cold at bay for nearly 2 days, the stove becomes more than hardware, it is a lifeline. Stove placement shapes the daily reality of Alaskan homesteads. Department of Energy studies reveal that a centrally located wood stove, set away from exterior walls, sends both radiant and convective heat across every inch of a compact cabin. In a 600 square foot home, moving the stove to the center instead of keeping it near a wall or window can cut peak heating demand by 25%. This approach evens out temperatures, reducing cold spots and keeping warmth steady through the longest winter nights, even when the thermometer drops below -40 degrees Fahrenheit. A 12-inch clearance around the stove is more than a safety measure. It is a calculated AR flow gap. This space keeps flammable materials safe and lets warm air move freely. Homesteaders who stick to the 12-inch rule notice fewer drafts and steadier heat, especially in tightly built cabins. Lowered ceilings, typically 7 to 8 feet, boost this effect. By bringing the ceiling down, warm air stays within reach, not lost overhead. Department of Energy airflow research confirms that a 7-foot ceiling can keep rooms 5 to 6 degrees warmer than a 9-foot ceiling, while also trimming fuel use by about 10%. For off-grid families, these choices turn every BTU into survival. Small cabins are not just a matter of taste in interior Alaska. They are a calculated response to the limits of off-grid heating. The numbers tell the story. For a cabin sized at 400 square feet, peak heating demand on a -40 degrees Fahrenheit night reaches about 22,000 British thermal units per hour. At 600 square feet, the load climbs to 30,000 British thermal units per hour. Push the footprint to 800 square feet, and the requirement jumps to 38,000 British thermal units per hour. Each step up in size means more exterior wall, more heat escaping, and more fuel to keep the cold at bay. Most homesteaders settle between 400 and 800 square feet for a reason. This range matches the output of the most reliable high-mass stoves, like the Blaze King, and keeps the firewood burden within reach for a single family. A 600 square foot cabin with R30 walls, an R50 ceiling, and R25 floor insulation can be kept warm through the worst 30-day cold spell with about 1 million British thermal units, roughly the energy stored in a full cord of seasoned birch. The math is unforgiving. Double the floor area, and the required heat and fuel supply nearly double as well. Once a cabin grows beyond 800 square feet, the limitations of a single wood stove become clear. At that scale, backup systems, propane heaters, kerosene stoves, or even a second wood burner move from optional to necessary. The sweet spot, then, is not just about comfort or cost. It is the point where a single, high-efficiency stove can meet the peak British thermal unit demand using fuel that a family can realistically harvest, haul, and stack before winter closes in. In the Alaskan bush, small means survivable. Stone, brick, and especially soapstone play a quiet but essential role in Alaskan homesteads, acting as the night shift for heat. When the fire inside a high-mass stove is burning, these materials absorb and hold onto warmth, then release it slowly after the flames die down. The physics is simple. The denser and more heat-retentive the material, the longer it can buffer the cold. Soapstone stands out here. With a specific heat of 0.5 BTU per pound per degree Fahrenheit and a density of 165 pounds per cubic foot, it can store up to 16,500 BTU per cubic foot during a typical stove cycle. That is why a 400-pound soapstone surround, often custom-fitted around stoves like the Blaze King, has become a common sight in cabins built for deep winter. Builders follow a sizing rule. For a 600 square foot cabin, about 320 pounds of soapstone or 800 pounds of brick is enough to cover the nightly heat demand when outside temperatures hover near -40 degrees. A soapstone bench or wall behind the stove absorbs excess heat during the day, then radiates it back for 10 to 12 hours after the fire goes out. Families in the Mat-Su Valley have logged overnight temperature curves showing the cabin holding steady at 68 degrees, even when the fire has burned down to coals. The thermal mass flattens the temperature swings, meaning fewer cold wake-ups and less frantic wood loading before dawn. This synergy between stove and stone lets homesteaders stretch each BTU as far as possible. But when a cold snap lasts longer than the stored heat, or the mass is undersized, the need for backup becomes clear. For most, the right mix of thermal mass is not about comfort. It is about buying precious hours of safety when the fire runs low and the outside world is still locked in deep freeze. Alaskan homesteads rely on a strict backup hierarchy to keep the cold at bay. Wood stoves form the backbone, but when axes break or illness strikes, propane steps in. A standard 45-gallon tank, found behind cabins from Tok to Nanana, holds about 1 million British thermal units, enough to run a 5,000 British thermal units per hour heater for 200 hours, or just over 8 days without pause. That margin is not for comfort, it is a buffer against blizzards, frozen wood piles, or the supply chain shocks that hit in 2012, when families with full tanks in November weathered the spike while others rationed heat. Propane's reliability in sub-zero temperatures depends on keeping tanks clear and regulators free of ice. If propane runs low, kerosene heaters take over. A 100-gallon drum matches the energy of a 45-gallon propane tank, but with a higher hourly output, often 10,000 British thermal units per hour, delivering 4 days of continuous heat. These heaters burn diesel or home heating oil, offering flexibility when propane is scarce, but require careful ventilation and regular carbon monoxide checks. Rocket mass heaters, though rare, offer a low-tech fallback, burning wood chips or scrap and storing warmth in thermal benches. The sizing rule is simple. Keep enough fuel to run your secondary system for at least 1 week at peak demand. For most, that means a full 45-gallon propane tank and a 100-gallon kerosene drum secured before winter sets in. Redundancy is not a luxury, it is survival. Insulation is the silent workhorse behind every warm Alaskan homestead. The Alaska Housing Authority sets the standard: R30 for walls, R50 for ceilings, and R25 under the floor. These numbers are not just technical jargon. They are the difference between burning through 7 cords of wood each winter or managing with 4.5 cords. Take the example of a 600-square-foot cabin near Talkeetna. Before a roof retrofit, the owner stacked and split 7 cords every season. After upgrading to R45 spray foam and ceiling leaks, his wood use dropped to just 4.5 cords. That's 3 fewer cords to fell, haul, and dry each year, a savings measured in weeks of hard labor and thousands of dollars over a decade. The payoff is immediate. High R-value insulation traps heat inside, so every BTU from the stove stays put longer. It's not only about comfort, it's about survival when the mercury drops to -60. A cabin with R30 walls loses heat 15 to 25% slower than one with older, thinner insulation. The ceiling matters most. Since heat rises fast, R50 overhead can make the difference between a home that stays above freezing overnight and one that does not. Retrofitting costs can run into a few $1,000s, but the return is clear in the woodpile and the warmth. For off-grid families, insulation is not an afterthought. It is the foundation that makes every other heating decision possible. Every winter in interior Alaska is shaped by the wood that was cut, split, and stacked the year before. The process starts with species selection. Birch is the backbone of most homesteads, packing about 24 megajoules of energy per kilogram, roughly 10,000 BTU per pound. Spruce, at 20 megajoules per kilogram, burns faster and is often reserved for kindling or shoulder season heat. But regardless of species, the real work is in the seasoning. Freshly felled birch can contain more than 60% water by weight. Burning it wet wastes heat and risks creosote buildup in the chimney, so the target is clear: wood must be dried to 20% moisture or less. That means harvesting in late summer, splitting by September, and stacking in a loose, raised pile under a roofed shed, never on the ground and never tightly packed. R flow is everything. The wood sits for 12 to 18 months, cycling through at least one full freeze-thaw season to drive out moisture. The labor adds up quickly. Processing a single cord, 128 cubic feet, takes about 80 person-hours from standing tree to stacked split. For a family burning 4 to 5 cords each winter, that is more than 300 hours of work, spread across the calendar. The rhythm becomes part of daily life, felling in July, splitting in October, stacking before the first snow. Each stick that goes into the stove represents not just stored energy, but months of physical effort and planning. When the mercury plunges and the stove is hungry, there is no shortcut. The discipline of wood management is what stands between a warm cabin and a dangerous night. If the wood is wet, the risk is not just a smoky fire, it is a blocked chimney and a home that cannot hold heat when it matters most. Creosote is the silent threat that builds inside every wood stove chimney. When wood burns at low temperatures, especially below 400 degrees Fahrenheit, smoke cools as it rises, and volatile compounds condense along the chimney walls. Over time, these deposits harden into creosote, a sticky, highly flammable residue. In the coldest months, when stoves run low and slow to conserve wood, creosote accumulates fastest. For Alaskan homesteaders, this is not a minor nuisance. According to the Alaska Fire Service, 9 chimney-related structure fires were reported statewide in 2022. While that is a small fraction of total fires, these incidents caused 15% of all fire-related fatalities in the interior, where help can be hours away. The cleaning routine is strict. Chimneys are swept twice each season, once after the spring wood-burning surge, and again following the late winter thaw. Some families schedule a third cleaning in high-use years. The process is hands-on and unforgiving. A steel brush on a rigid rod scrapes the flue, dislodging tar-black flakes that can ignite if left unchecked. The goal is to keep the flue temperature above 400 degrees Fahrenheit during burns, limiting condensation and slowing creosote formation, but no stove is immune. Chimney maintenance is more than a chore. It is a survival discipline. Every homestead registered in Alaska is required to have a carbon monoxide detector, a direct response to the risk of blocked chimneys and invisible gas buildup. Annual inspections, often performed by the homesteaders themselves, look for cracks, loose mortar, and signs of downdraft. In this environment, a neglected chimney is a direct hazard to life. The lesson is clear. The warmth inside an Alaskan cabin depends as much on what happens above the ceiling as what burns below it. In the heart of Alaska's interior, the culture around home heating runs deeper than any single technology or product. The guiding principle is straightforward: keep it simple, keep it reliable. Elders in these communities are quick to point out that every extra switch, pump, or electronic control is another chance for something to break when the mercury plunges and help is days away. The preference for stoves with no digital displays, for doors that latch with a solid clunk instead of a beep, is not nostalgia, it is a philosophy born from hard-won experience. This ethos is woven into daily life. Children learn to split wood before they can ride a bike, and teenagers are taught to diagnose a smoky burn or a sluggish draft long before they are handed car keys. Skills are handed down in person, not on paper, standing side by side at the woodpile or kneeling in front of the stove. In these moments, knowledge moves from one generation to the next, not as a formal lesson, but as a quiet expectation. Stories circulate about the winter a family's backup heater failed, or the year a neighbor's imported pellet stove froze up and left them scrambling for dry kindling. The lesson is always the same: trust what you can fix with your own hands. As one elder puts it, the more moving parts your heat source has, the more ways it can fail you at the worst possible moment. In a place where the stakes are measured in degrees and minutes, simplicity is not just a preference, it is a form of resilience. A lifetime spent in the Alaskan interior leaves its own kind of wisdom. One veteran homesteader, now in his 70s, stands by the same principle that guided him through decades of sub-zero winters. He leans on the handle of his splitting maul and says, "The more moving parts your heat source has, the more ways it can fail you at the worst possible moment." In his world, that's not just a saying, it's a rule for staying alive. He remembers the winter the temperature dropped below -60 when the digital thermostat on a neighbor's backup heater froze solid, and only the old iron stove kept the house above freezing. He's seen imported pellet stoves seize up when the auger jammed with ice, and watched families scramble to relight a fire after an electric igniter failed in the dark. For him, simplicity is more than convenience. It's the confidence that comes from knowing every part of his heating system can be fixed with tools he owns and skills he's taught his children. In a place where the margin for error is measured in minutes, that kind of certainty is as necessary as the warmth itself. Each winter, interior Alaska endures over 140 nights below zero. For homesteaders 30 miles from help, survival depends on systems they can trust: a Blaze King or Drolet stove, seasoned birch, triple pane glass, and insulation that never quits. As utility grids grow less predictable, their philosophy endures. The more moving parts your heat source has, the more ways it can fail you at the worst possible moment. Thanks for watching.